we're starting the recording right now, and today we're talking about synthesis and sound design, and this is like an intro. Today's lesson is really just an intro to synthesizers and how they work and the basics of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off actually with synthesizers themselves and like an overview of all the pieces of the synthesizer, and then we're going to go into a little bit of the history and how all those pieces kind of came together. That's the kind of the way we're going to be doing this stuff. So what I recommend to do to follow along with this and to kind of be on the same page with me is to get this Uhei Tyrell N6 synthesizer. It's a really good synth that's free to download, and what you can just do is you can just go into your browser here and just do a search for the Tyrell N6, and it should pop up over here under Uhei Products Tyrell N6, and you just click on this and it brings it up, and you can just click on the link and it will take you to another site where you can download it from amazona.de, which is, I guess it's like a, I don't know what this site is. I guess it's like a synth and like a music kind of just a website for like articles and stuff about everything, but it's all in German, so I can't read what it is, but you can download it over here. Download the sounds, experiment. Here we go. Download the Mac version is what you want. This version 6, N6 version 3.0, 64-bit for Mac and for Windows. So that's where you would download that. Yeah, it's like kind of towards the top of the page. So that's where you're going to get that synth. And there's a link, if you're in my class, there's a link to the email for that in the email that I sent out a while ago about that one. It's one of the synths in there. So, and once again, hey, get off there. So once again, the reason why we're going to use this one is because it's just got a little bit of everything. It's not exactly the most basic of synthesizers, but it's a really good sounding synth, and it's basic enough that we can talk about all the stuff that we need to talk about in there. And then I'm going to show you some other synthesizers as well as part of all this. And just kind of wrestling with the puppy here for a second. Eventually she's gonna get sleepy and go to sleep, but it hasn't happened yet. She's still like awake and ready to party, aren't you? You're still awake and ready to party? Yes, you are. All right. Okay. So let's get going with this. So we're going to come over here to preview, and we're going to start off with my notes here. And basically there's two parts of synthesis and two ways that we identify sound. And really, if you're talking about sound design and synthesis and you want to make your own sounds, a lot of it really has to come from you identifying the sounds and you kind of figuring out what it is you're trying to create, what kind of sound you're actually trying to create. And the way we kind of identify sounds, the two ways, is from the envelope and the timbre. Now, the envelope is the shape of the sound's loudness, and the timbre is the brightness or darkness of a sound. And it's defined by the harmonics of the sound. So if a sound is like a really deep sound, like a boo, that doesn't have a whole lot of harmonic frequencies. That's more of a sine wave type of sound. But if it's more of a type of sound, that has a lot more harmonic frequencies, and you can hear it's a brighter sound. That's what the timbre is. The timbre is how like dark or bright the sound is, and the envelope is the shape of a sound. So if we say a sound is a very short sound, like a boop type of sound, then that's a short envelope. It's got a fast attack and a really fast release. But if it's something that's more of a sustained sound, boop type of sound, then it's got a high sustain. That sound still has a fast attack and a fast release, fast-ish release. So that's the envelope and the timbre, and every sound is really defined by these things. So for example, if we're talking about percussion sound, a percussion sound might be like a cymbal, might be a psh. And that sound, you can hear, it starts fast and it decays over time, right? So that's the envelope. The envelope is, it starts fast, it decays over time. Now the timbre of that would be noise. Basically a cymbal is mostly just noise. It's a lot of the frequencies all at once, so it doesn't really have a pitch. It's just kind of everything all at one time. So that's really, if you want to start developing your own sounds, the first thing you need to do is kind of, in order to achieve specific goals, is you need to be able to identify what makes a sound a particular way. Now, if all you want to do is just get in and kind of experiment, well, that's also really fun and really cool, and I highly recommend doing that. But understanding the different parts of the synthesizer, and at least understanding how the envelope and the timbre kind of affect things will help you to figure out like what it is that you are, what knobs you're turning or what faders you're pushing or anything like that. It all kind of like comes back together. So you don't have to necessarily, every time you sit down to make a new sound, you don't have to always sit down and have a sound destination in mind. But if you understand how these things all come together, then everything kind of helps everything else. So envelope and timbre, these are really important to kind of wrap your head around. And what I would recommend doing is just start listening to different instruments and try to kind of learn the vocabulary, which we're going to be talking about today, to identify what's going on. Is the timbre dark? Is it bright? Is the envelope have a fast attack? Does it have a slow attack? Does it have a lot of sustain? Does it have no sustain? Does it have a long release? Does it have a short release? Stuff like that is really important. And just knowing the vocabulary and kind of being able to understand what you're listening to will go a long way in helping you to create your own sounds. Okay, next up is the types of synthesizers we're going to be dealing with. Now, there's two types of synthesizers in the world in broad strokes. These are all really broad strokes. Okay, dog, hold on a second. Let me see here. Let me mute this. There you go. Now you can step on the keyboard as much as you want. So there's two types of synthesizers that really we're dealing with in the world these days, and that's analog and digital. Analog synthesizers use electricity to make sound, and there are a lot of like hardware synthesizers are analog. And then digital use math to make sounds. And that's where it's using a computer processor to generate the tones. Now, it's not a difference between hardware and software synthesizers. Hardware synthesizers can be either analog or digital. They can be analog or digital, or they can be a combination of both. And then software synthesizers are all digital, but you'll hear the terms analog emulation or like that kind of stuff. And what they're doing is they're emulating analog synthesizers. They're using math, but they're using math to kind of recreate the tonal qualities of an analog synthesizer. So even though a synthesizer on your computer might look like an analog synth and it might sound like an analog synth, it is still a digital synthesizer. Now, once we get into, there's the two types of synths, then there's also many different types of synthesis. And the main one we're going to be dealing with today, and that's like the kind of the basis for all synthesis, is what we call subtractive synthesis. And subtractive synthesis is where you start with one kind of sound, and then you use filters to subtract the harmonic frequencies out of that sound. And that's the kind of the basics of synthesis, and that's what we're going to be dealing with today. Then there's also additive synthesis, where you're using sine waves to build up, to add to make more sounds. There's also I got you, Johnny. There's also like physical modeling synthesis. There's FM synthesis. There's all sorts of different types of synthesis. And what we're talking about when we say that is, how does the synthesizer actually make the sound? So analog versus digital are the types of synths that we have out. And then how does that synth actually make the sound? And that's the type of synthesis. So if it's FM synthesis, it's using frequency modulation. If it's physical modeling, it's using math to kind of replicate the sounds, the physical properties of like physics in the real world. If it's subtractive synthesis, it could be analog or digital, but it's starting with a specific sound and it's subtracting out the harmonic frequencies. And those are different types of synthesis there. And I hope y'all can still hear me. I think y'all can, but the fuzzy thing from my microphone just got dropped off by the dog, I think. I hope you didn't eat it. Did you eat it? No. Okay. All right. So the main types of synths, the building blocks of synths that we have here are these three main things. And this is really important. On the test, which we will go over today, we talk about the three main parts of synths, and also in your reflection discussion, it talks about what are the main parts of a synthesizer and how do they work. Well, the three main parts of a synthesizer are the oscillator, the filter, and the amplifier. Everything after that is really just helping the synth, like helping you with sound design. But these are the main parts here. That's the oscillator, the filter, and the amplifier. And these are the parts that actually touch the sound. Nothing else really touches the sound unless you have effects or something like that, and that's just extra stuff. So, for example, the oscillator is what actually creates the sound. Now, if we can have a digital synth that uses digital oscillators, which is using computer chips and math and stuff to make the sound, running into an analog filter. So you can mix and match different parts. You could have an analog oscillator that goes into a digital filter. So all these, like analog versus digital, could be mixed and matched with all these different parts here. So the oscillator is what actually creates the sound. It's the point of sound generation. Okay, that's where the sound is generated. Then that goes into the filter. The filter shapes the harmonic frequencies of the sound. Let me just pull up my little thing here so you can see a little bit better. All right, there we go. So the filter shapes the harmonic frequencies of the sound, and then the amplifier shapes the loudness of the sound. And the way it flows is like this. It goes from the oscillator into the filter into the amplifier, and it always runs like that. Every synth that you have available to you has an oscillator, filter, and an amplifier, and it always runs like this. But some synthesizers, for example Massive, has an amplifier built into each oscillator, and that's how you mix the different oscillators together in Massive. But it also has an amplifier at the end of everything also to kind of tie in the whole sound as a whole. And we're going to come back and talk about that, and I'll even show you Massive, the original Massive, a little bit today, and we'll go into some of the more modern synths that have been coming out recently as well, as soon as the dog decides that she's going to go to sleep. Go to sleep. Go to sleep. There you go. You want to chew on that? You can chew on that if you want. All right. There we go. Boom. Okay. So the different oscillator waveforms. Now remember I talked about that the subtractive synthesizer starts with waveforms and it subtracts the harmonics out of those using a filter. Well, that's what we're talking about today. So the oscillator, this one right here that creates the sound, well, it creates a sound by creating waveforms, especially in a subtractive synthesizer. And this is kind of like the different types of synthesis I mentioned before. Oscillators create the sound in different ways. So with the subtractive synthesizers, just creating the basics of of sound. So those are a sine wave, a triangle wave, a square wave, and a sawtooth wave. And then there's also noise. And those kind of go in this direction from less harmonics to more harmonics. So the least amount of harmonics is a sine wave. The sine wave is the building block of all sound, and it's just a pure tone on a specific frequency, and that creates that pitch. Everything else has a sine wave at the base, and it goes up from there by adding in different harmonic frequencies. So the triangle wave is kind of a brighter sine wave. It sounds like a kind of a richer sound wave. And then you have a square wave, and then you have a sawtooth wave, and the sawtooth wave is actually quite a lot of noise. And then the noise is just noise. And let me see if I can show you an example of what these sound like. We're going to go over here to my Pro Tools and unmute this. So, all right. So here we have our mixer here. I'm going to turn down oscillator 2, so now we just have oscillator 1. All right, so we can do that, and let's pull this around over here. There we go. Okay, so here's the sine wave, and you can see right in here, if we look at my screen, you can see here's the different types of waves in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit that, and that's a sine wave. That's a triangle wave. There is a sawtooth wave, and there's a square wave. And the square wave, let's see, usually has a way that you can change the pulse width of the sawtooth wave, but I actually don't know how to do it on here. Yeah, so I'm not sure how to change the pulse width of this one, but that's basically a square wave. So let's just listen to this one more time. We've got our sine wave. You can hear just a pure tone if I play it higher. Okay, and then we've got our triangle wave. And you can hear it's basically the same, it's just got a few more, like it's a little bit brighter, but not much. Then we've got our, let's go over here, whoops. Okay, you want to go lie down? Go ahead and lie down. Then we've got the square wave. And I'm going to come back here and play the sawtooth wave. Okay. And there's your different waveform types there. That's all these different ones right here, and that's how they sound. Now let's see, is there a noise? Oh, there's a noise generator in here as well. So if I just go over here, go to my noise, and you can notice if I play different keys on my keyboard, it does not change what that noise sounds like. It does not change the pitch of the noise because noise does not have a pitch. What is up, Lfo? How you doing, man? Okay. And I'm going to come back and explain this mixer here in a little bit. Oh, you had some issues with your Wi-Fi? Okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know. So we'll come back and explain how this synth in particular works. Right now, we're just talking about the different parts of the synthesizer. We're not really talking about how it works yet. So now, different waveforms have different amounts of harmonic frequencies, and the oscillator controls the pitch. So the oscillator has the pitch in it as well. So if we look in here, we can see here's my oscillator right there. And you can see this one here, shape 1, which is that one there. Let me go ahead and move the dog. She was sleeping on the pitch bend. If I turn this down, let's see, how do I get the... Let's get that back. Can we get it back? All right, that tuning is a little bit weird. I'm not sure where the tuning is in here, but there we go. And we can hear my second oscillator here, and the pitch is right in here. This one here is the pitch. So when I say the pitch is controlled at the oscillator, it's right here. And different synthesizers all handle these things differently. These are kind of broad strokes here, what I'm talking about. When I say the oscillator controls the pitch, that is true, but different synthesizers, the oscillator controls the pitch in slightly different ways. So for every synthesizer, you have to kind of figure out how all this stuff works together. It's generally really easy to figure it out though. Once you understand how a synthesizer works in general, a lot of these things are pretty self-evident when you start to look at different synths. All right, the amplifier controls the loudness, and the amplifier is responsible for turning the generated sound on and off. So the oscillator is constantly playing a note. I mean, it's constantly playing sound. It's just got a sound output that's just constant. And then the amplifier turns that sound on and off and makes it louder and softer over time. So the oscillator is generating current sound, like constant sound, and the amplifier goes in here in the middle to kind of stop that sound and shape it. And again, different synths work differently, but in general, unless you're dealing with a modular synthesizer, you're never really going to see this in action because the amplifier is always in the middle there. So for example, in this one here, our amplifier is it's just this knob right here on the output, and then we're using the envelope here as a gate. You can see it's set as a gate here. We can use the envelope here to control that, and with this one here, it's just set up so it's just a basic synth. So for example, if I go down here, I'm not sure which one is controlling my, oh, it says here ADSR 1. Right, so we can change that, and I'm going to show you all about all this stuff here. Let me move this over a little bit. There we go. Okay. Cool. All right, so yeah, the ADSR 1 is controlling our amplifier here, and the output, the overall output, is right here. So if I wanted to adjust the sound, so you can, I'm clicking the key but nothing's happening, and what I can do is I can go up here and I can say, all right, let's make this kind of like a 808 type of bassy sound. Let's go down here. I'm going to turn the level up here on the output. Put it into mono mode. Right, and you can hear it's got like a taper off, kind of like an 808 type of bass sound here. And I'm just using that as an example because that's a pretty common sound that we hear in a lot of modern music, is this kind of like tapered, plucky sound. That's so funny, her tail is laying on the keyboard now. There we go. Move her over a little bit. There we go. Where do you get the synthesizer? I showed it in the beginning here. You just got to search for Tyrell N6, Tyrell N6. Do a Google search on that and it'll show you where to get it. But it's also, I sent out an email like months ago to you guys with all the different synthesizers I recommend that y'all pick up, and it's listed in there as well. All right. So the amplifier here, we can see the maximum output level, and that's what we're looking at right here. This output level here is the maximum output level, and this envelope here is like a percentage of that. We're going to talk about that envelope in just a minute here. But the amp level is the max output level. Anything you do to the sound is subtracted from that max level. So as we can hear, there's no sound, and then when I hit the key, it's affecting that sound, and that's all based on this. So if I turn this output down, you can hear it gets less or more, right? So that's the overall kind of sound right there. All right. Then we have our filter, and the filter shapes the frequency of the sound by subtracting harmonics, and this is where the word subtractive synthesis comes from. So there's 4 filter types. Generally, there's 4 filter types: low pass, high pass, band pass, and notch, which is also called band reject. And in these diagrams here, the green represents the frequencies that you hear. So for example, if I have a low pass filter, that means that all the low frequencies are being heard. If I have a high pass filter, all the high frequencies are being heard. There's a band pass, the ones in the middle, and then notch is kind of rejecting out certain frequencies. So if I go over here and look at this one, the filter, this filter, let's see here. We have, okay, high pass, low pass, and there's our poles right here. And then here's our cutoff. So if I go over here, let's get a bright sound going on. So I'm going to get my square wave. There's my square wave there. And if we go ahead and use our cutoff frequency, you can hear And this changes it from I don't know what that's, mix spread. Interesting. Okay, so you can mix between your high pass and your low pass filter on here. So if I go up to the top, it's my high pass filter. So you can hear the low frequencies are being cut out. And if I go down here on the bottom, it's my low pass filter. And the high frequencies are being cut out, so the low filtered frequencies are going through. And then if I go to band pass, it sounds like this. So if I'm down low, it's the low frequencies are coming through. If I'm up high, it's the high frequencies are coming through. So we can flip back and forth between those there. Let me go ahead and just real quick program in like a little synth line here. I'm gonna zoom in here. Let's just do a little 4-bar loop. And let's get a metronome, click track, boop, there you are. Cool. All right, we're gonna loop record. Actually, we won't, oh yeah. We're gonna do like this, and okay, there we go. There we go, like that. I'm going to cut it right there. Double click on this. Let's zoom in on here. There we go. Cool. And we're going to just quickly quantize those. Awesome. Put that, whoops. Put that there. Over there, boom. All right, cool. Nice. So I got this. I just put that in there so I just have something to play with, right? So if I go in here and mess with my frequency, my filter, you can hear how that changes the sound over time. And I'm just messing with this filter right here. Because it's a low pass, if I pull it down, this is my cutoff frequency. It's cutting out those high frequencies there. But if I turn it into a high pass filter by moving this fader up here, now we're getting rid of all those low frequencies. It's a high pass filter. So if I go all the way up, we're only hearing the highest frequencies. And if I pull it down, the further down I pull it, we're going to hear all those lower frequencies. And with this synthesizer, the way it's designed is it's got this fader here to kind of bounce back and forth between those two filters. And this is something you see on other synthesizers as well. It's not just this synth that has this feature. So if I go in the middle here, you can hear it changes the sound, kind of a notchy, kind of phasery type of thing. Kind of an interesting sound there by putting that knob, the fader right here in the middle. But if we want it to be strictly a low pass filter, we'll just put it all the way down. And if you want it to be strictly a high pass filter, we'll just put it all the way up here. And if you want it to be a band pass filter, I think it doesn't really matter. Yeah, up or down. Now we can move it around here and you can hear how it sounds. Probably the most common type of filter is the low pass filter. I'm just going to put it right down there like that. There we go. Cool. And that sounds pretty good. Now, let's go over here and take a look at this. There are a couple different types of controls and different parts of filters that you have normally. We have the cutoff, frequency cutoff, adjusts where the filter cut will affect, where the filter will cut the frequencies. And that's what you've just been seeing here, for example, with this low pass filter. If I go over here and I turn it all the way down, we're cutting out all those high frequencies. letting the low frequencies pass through, hence the name low pass. And that's our frequency cutoff right here. And if I go to my resonance, the resonance or peak is a gain bump at the cutoff point. So wherever my cutoff point is, we're going to see that resonance happen. If I boost this up, it changes the sound. You hear how that kind of puts like a peak at it? Turn that resonance down. Hear what that sounds like there? Now, the oscillator is what makes the sound, and the filter greatly affects what that sound finally sounds like. These are the two most important parts of an analog synthesizer, of any synthesizer really. But different filters sound different. You can't just take any kind of filter and just throw it on a sound and it's going to sound always the same as the next filter. Oscillators sound different, and that's pretty obvious that different oscillators on different synthesizers would sound differently. That makes sense. But a lot of people might not really understand that the filter is the next big part of the equation there. The filter is so important about making that sound special. And different filters from different synthesizers sound very differently. So for example, on a Moog low pass filter, a lot of the classic ones, when you boost the resonance, it actually cuts out the low frequencies a little bit, even though that doesn't like, if it's a low pass filter, you're like, why would it cut out those low frequencies? It's just the way the filter works. And so if you have an old, if you have like I got a sub 37, for example, and if I turn up the resonance on there, it actually decreases my low end of the sound. So if I want like a really big, warm, fat low end, I'm not going to boost that resonance very much on the filter. But with this filter, you can hear there's a lot of nice low end going on. And if I boost the resonance, it doesn't affect that low end at all. And that's other synthesizers work like this. So the filter is really makes a big difference in your sound, as well as the oscillator. The oscillator, obviously, because that's what's generating the sound. But the filter also changes the sound quite a bit. And you have to really understand, and you have to play with different filter types and different synthesizers to really get a feel for what you're looking for. Because the synth that you choose, the way it works with the sound really changes everything. So it's not just about going out and buying a synth that everybody loves and people are like, oh yeah, this is the best synth ever. It's really about understanding what you're trying to get out of your synthesizer and then looking for a synth that has those features. All right. So the next thing here for filters is the slope, which determines how quickly the filter cuts off. You have 6 dB, 12 dB, 24 dB, 48 dB, things like that. So let's take a look at where our slope is on here. Now on this one, it's not called slope, it's called poles. And here we have 12, 24, and 36. And different synthesizers have different numbers for this. 12, 24, and 36, what this is talking about here is how much decibel cut there will be per octave of frequency beyond the cutoff. So for example, if I take this frequency cutoff here and I put it right here. Now what this is saying over here in my poles is that if I set it to 12 dB per octave, that means it's going to cut it by 12 dB of every octave and frequencies above that cutoff point. So in theory, we should hear more of the high frequencies when we change this to 12. And we do. Yeah. Let's put it back on 24. So that's making that slope a bit steeper. We can see here in the pictures here, this one's like a shallow curve. This one's more steep, and then this one's like super steep. And I just put these numbers here, but really what you got to do is you got to listen to it and hear what it sounds like for yourself. So we got this here, and let's change this again. And you can hear it cut off more of the frequencies there still. go back in here. Yep. Okay. Cool. Okay. So you can hear what those differently. And different pulls, your pull and your resonance are connected directly. If I crank this up at 36, let's change it to 24. Actually, on this synth, 24 and 36 are sounding pretty much identical. And yeah, the pull in this one doesn't really seem to be affecting that resonance very much. But different synthesizers, it affects it a lot. So if you have like less pulls or less like 6 dB or 12 dB versus 48 or 24 or something like that, it's going to make that resonance really spike more depending on where you've got that set there. But this synth, it doesn't really seem to make that much of a difference. And again, that doesn't make it better or worse, it just makes it different. They're all different. Okay, so then we go in here to our next part here, which is the modulation. So let me just back up here for a second and just go back to this page right here. The oscillator goes into the filter, goes into the amplifier, and this is what affects your sound. This is where the sound is actually going through. The sound is generated in the oscillator, it goes into the filter, and it goes into your amplifier there. And that is, let's see, that's the actual sound is running through these parts. This is your sound part of everything. The next, what we're going to talk about here is the modulation section. In the modulation section, it's very important to understand that the modulation section, the sound is not traveling through the modulation section. What's happening is we have various modulation sources that are affecting parameters of those three elements. So we still have the oscillator, the filter, and the amplifier, but we can use an LFO or an envelope to affect different parameters within these parts. So the synth modulation is two things, envelope and LFOs. They do not touch the sound. They modulate parameters associated with the oscillator, amplifier, or filter to change the sound. So you can have an analog synthesizer that has digital modulation sections. And this is actually quite common, especially with cheaper synthesizers. Like if we're talking about like the Behringer synthesizers or stuff like that, not all of them, but some of them will have like a digital envelope or a digital LFO. And that it does a couple things. One, it makes it a lot more steady, and it also allows you to do more stuff with the envelope or the LFO. But the synth would still be an analog synthesizer because the sound portion is completely analog. So they can, without being weird or anything like that, without being sneaky, they can say it's an analog synthesizer, even if it has a digital LFO or digital envelope. And depending on what you're going for, you might want to have a digital envelope or a digital LFO because you can do more with them than with an analog envelope or an analog LFO. So it's really, it's the important part when we're talking about analog synthesizers is the sound, the sound signal flow is all analog. And then after that, if it has digital or analog LFOs or envelopes, it is going to change things up a bit, but it's not changing the sound of the analog part of the sound that you're looking for. Okay. So let's start with the envelope. An envelope is something that happens when you press a key and then you release the key, or it happens when you trigger it somehow. And when you trigger it, it runs through these different sections one time. So the envelope has an ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, and release. When you press a key, a note on message is sent, and when you release it, a note off message is sent. The envelope is what happens from the time you press the key to the time you release it, and a little bit after. So for example, when I press the key on my keyboard, it goes through all these different parts here. And if I'm holding it down, it's still going through all those different parts, and it looks like this. I press the key here, it's the note on message, and I release the key, it's the note off message, and that's something we talked about when we talked about MIDI a few months ago. So the note on message is sent, and it says, okay, we're pressing the key, and then as long as you're holding that key down, it's still gonna be held down. And when you release the key, it sends a note off message. And whatever happens in there is the envelope. So the envelope is here, and we're going to say it starts at 0%, which is silence, and it goes up to 100%, which is the max. In this case, our output level here is our 100% right here, if we're talking about our amplifier. And everything that happens in the middle here is a percentage of that spectrum there. It's like 100% or 50% or 0%, something like that. So we start at silence. This is before you hit the key. When you're not hit the key, of course, there's silence. It's not letting that signal go through. I press the key, and the first thing that happens is the sound goes up to 100%. And the time it takes to get from 0% to 100% is called the attack. If I have a short attack, it's going to go up really quickly. Let me just go ahead and put my sustain all the way up, put my decay and my release all the way down here. Go in here, and if I hit it, you can see and hear rather how it's like very fast on either side. If I put my attack up, when I hit the key, you can hear how it slides into it. It like kind of takes a while to ramp up. That's my attack. My attack time is a slow attack time. And a lot of these synthesizers, they will display that in terms of seconds. This one does not, but some synthesizers will display it in terms of like seconds or parts of a second. So that's my attack. Let's go over here and talk about the release next. When I let go of the note, the time it takes to get back to 0, that's my release. The release is what happens after you release the note. You let go of the note, you release it, and that note has to go back to silence. It wants to go back home, right? The home is silence. So how long does it take to get to that silence? That is our release time. So the attack time is how long it takes to go from silence to the first part of the sound there. And then when we let go, the release time is how long it takes to go from whatever level we're at to silence again. So in this case here, if I set my release high like this, it takes a while to slope up into my sound. I'm holding my key down right now, and I let go, and it takes time to go back to 0. Okay, now that was a lot of time to go back to 0. I'm going to put this down a little bit. And so the lower the number, the faster it is, the quicker it's going to go back to silence, or higher, the slower it's going to go to silence. Right? You hear how that? Now let's turn these to be faster. I'm going to put them both all the way down again. Now listen to it. And you can even hear the pop on the end there. So let's go ahead and push these up just a little bit just to get rid of that pop. Right, so here, if I put it up a little bit, it's still got a nice hard attack, but we don't hear the pop on the end anymore. Let me put it all the way back down. See, it's got that nasty pop on the end. I don't want that. There we go. Now it's got a good fast attack and a good fast release, but no annoying pop. Yep, the pop is there because of how fast the release is, because it's actually literally releasing it when the waveform is at some kind of weird place, when it's not the 0 crossing. And so if you want to get rid of those pops, usually what you're going to do is you're going to play with the attack and the release just a little bit, not a whole lot, just a little bit there. So here's my right. Let me go ahead and actually adjust these so they're all exactly the same. Put it at 240, actually 16th notes. There we go. Now what's happening here is our sustain is all the way up, and let's talk about that sustain level. The sustain level is when you're holding the note down, what is the level of the sound? It's not a time, it's at a level. So your attack and your decay and your release, they're all times. So the attack is how long it takes to get up to, how long it gets up to 100%. And then the sustain is when I'm holding the key down, what's the level of the sustain? So the decay is how long it takes to go from 100% to that sustain level of whatever that is. Now, if the sustain level is set at 100%, then, so Swift, you can just do a search for Tyrell N6 on Google, and it'll be like one of the first ones that pops up. You don't need to find the email. Because I think the email just says Yuhei. I don't think it says Tyrell N6 because I think I forgot the name. But I would just do a Google search. All right. So the attack is all the way up to 100%. The decay is how long it takes to go from 100% to the sustain level. Now, if my sustain level is set at 100%, you're not going to hear that decay at all. And that really confused me when I was first learning about synthesizers. I could not wrap my head around that at all because I didn't have anybody who just sat down and said, the decay and the sustain are directly connected. If your sustain is set all the way up, you're not going to hear any decay at all. So I had to just learn it by just sitting there and looking at it and figuring it out. And finally one day it broke through my big thick skull and it was like, oh, that's what's going on there. It took forever because there was, like, when I was learning this stuff, there was no such thing as YouTube. The internet wasn't what it is today. So I couldn't just watch somebody doing this. And I didn't have any friends who were using synthesizers like this. I had like one friend who was doing anything with synthesizers, and he was just as like, you know, basic about it as I was. He was just as new as I was. So he wasn't really doing anything with it. So you know, it took me forever. And when I say forever, I mean like a year or more. It took me a long time to really understand what was going on with that. I couldn't figure out what the connection there was with this stuff. And also, you know, you got to keep in mind, different synths work differently, so I didn't have a lot of different options to play with. I had the one synth that I had, and I think the synth I had was like this it was an old Moog, actually a realistic from Radio Shack, but it was made by Moog Music, so it has the sound of a Moog. It's a really great sounding synth, but it's very confusing. Even after I learned about synthesizers, that synth was still pretty confusing. It took me a while before I really started to understand that stuff. So hopefully it won't take you as long because I'm sitting here telling you that the sustain and the decay are connected together. So if my sustain is set all the way up, we're not going to hear this knob do anything. Just like your ratio and your threshold on your compressors are connected. If you have your ratio all the way set to 0, it doesn't matter what you set your threshold at, it's not going to do anything. Or likewise, if you have your ratio all the way up, but your threshold is also all the way up, it's not going to do anything because your threshold, they need to be working kind of together, they're connected. Same thing with this. On this envelope, if I have my sustain set all the way up, the decay is not going to change anything at all. So as long as I have the sustain all the way up, this decay is not going to do anything. Now, let's make it so this decay does something. So what I'm going to do here is if I pull the sustain down to 50%, first of all, we notice there's like a pop on the beginning of the sound. I'm going to pull it down a little bit more. We also notice that the sound gets louder and softer, and that's because, remember, sustain is a level amount. It's the amount. So let's set it down right here. And now let's turn up that decay. Now you hear it puts a little bump on the beginning of the note, kind of like a compressor almost. Because it's literally what it's doing is the sound is starting loud because the attack is really quick, so it goes from 0 to 100% really fast, and then it drops down to my sustain level as I hold the note down, but it's dropping down pretty quickly. Now if I wanted to drop down slower, I just turn my decay up. If I turn my sustain down like this, you can hear it a little bit better. Hear how it takes longer to get down to that level? Sustain is the volume of the envelope. Well, I mean, I guess so. Sustain is what's controlling the volume of the envelope. So let's try to look at it not in terms of sustain is the volume. Sustain is controlling the volume, because I want you to look at these things correctly and like how it's actually working. I want you to start looking at it one way and then later on have to kind of reshift how you're looking at it. Sustain, all these things are controlling the level, and so the sustain is controlling the when you're holding it down, but the overall volume is actually up here on the output. Okay, so if I turn this down, it makes that pop, the whole sound is like softer, because that's like what's happening here. So the beginning part, that 100% is actually the volume output. But yeah, I mean, I guess the sustain is like the level of the sound as you hold it down. The volume level of a held note. So if I pull this up though, you can hear it's just right, there's no, that decay is not doing anything anymore as the sustain is all the way up. All right, so, and it will take you a little bit of time to get this, but just real quick, let me just go over a couple things. One, if you have like a lead sound, or if you want to make some kind of pad string sounds, right? We need to have the sustain be up pretty far. If you want to make like an 808 bass sound, good, yeah, James, thanks. I like that. I'm sorry, I was just reading what James is writing here. It's best to learn each parameter as it actually is in life, because in live it gets drowned out if you use it as a different purpose as it is. So getting it precise to how you like it is the best advice I can get you. Yep, I agree. So if we want to make like an 808 type of bass sound, well, and this comes back to what I was mentioning before about your envelope and the timbre of the sound. Remember in the notes, back in the very beginning of the notes, I said the two things that help us identify sounds is the envelope and the timbre. So if I listen to an 808 sound and I say, okay, what's happening with the 808 sound? Well, the envelope here is gonna be a big deal for an 808 sound, because an 808 sound doesn't go boom, it goes boom. It kind of fades out, boom, right? Because it's actually the trap bass line sound that started from 808 kick drums. That's where it kind of came from. But we can emulate that with a synthesizer by saying, okay, there's no sustain on an 808 synth sound. It just goes from all the way loud to, and it goes down to silence. Every time you hit it, it sounds exactly the same. So we're going to turn down the sustain all the way. No sustain. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the release and the decay to be exactly the same, because if you set them to be the same, that means that if I hold the note down or if I hit it quick, it's going to sound exactly the same. It's going to react exactly the same. So right? And then you would just play with these here. And that's a really important thing, is that if you want to have a sound that reacts the same, if you hold it or if you hit it, you're going to set your decay and release exactly the same and put your sustain all the way down. Because if I'm holding it down, we don't want it to keep playing the sound. We want it to stop playing the sound. So you're going to hit that and then turn it down like that. So And I can take the sound and I can make it a little bit shorter. There we go. So you can hear, like, if I want to give it like a little bit more of a, like, it takes longer to fade out. Now, a lot of people will misinterpret that kind of like length as a sustain. It's not the sustain. It's actually a decay, and we would call it a release, decay or release. You can call it either one, and we'd say it's a longer release or a longer decay. They can both be used interchangeably with a sound like this. Now, this is using the envelope on the amplifier, but we can also use the envelope to control our filter as well. And this one here, what if we wanted to have like a little bit more of a pop on the beginning of the sound? Well, if I just take my filter here, I turn it up, right? Right, you can hear how it changes the sound over time here. Okay. Right now, the filter here is connected to ADSR2, so it's our envelope 2 right here. Let me just back up a little bit. There we go, so y'all can see everything on the screen at once. So if I want this envelope 2 to control my sound, it's already controlling it right here, and this mod here is going to show me how much it's controlling it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my my envelope 2 to be basically the same as envelope 1, but I'm just going to set this attack and decay to be a bit shorter so it has a little pop on the beginning of each note. Hear that little pop? The little pop is because what's happening is the envelope here is opening up the filter each time it gets hit. So if I want it to be longer, with like just a little bit, right? And we can adjust that to taste right there. So it's a balancing act between all these different controls to design your own sounds, and you really have to kind of learn how this stuff works, and you have to play with it. And again, it's like I keep saying the same thing. You know, I'm just showing you this stuff. You actually have to go in and practice it and work on creating different types of sounds, and that's why I have different like assignments for you, is to get you practicing this stuff so you can practice the correct things. But that's what's happening right here. So that's our envelopes here. Now let's talk about our LFOs. That's the LFO is the low frequency oscillator. We're going to come back and talk more about this modulation right here, these mods here. We're going to talk more about those in a bit, but I want to come back here and talk about the LFO first before we talk about our modulation matrices. So the LFO is the low frequency oscillator. It's just a really slow oscillator. An oscillator is creating a waveform, and it's creating it fast enough so that we can hear it. But when you talk about a LFO, it's creating it so slow that we can't actually hear it. And they usually include the same waveforms as a normal oscillator: sine, triangle, square, and sawtooth. So what they realized, one of the first people making these synthesizers, is that they have these oscillators, and the oscillators are, you know, making the sound for us. And remember, sound is like a physical thing. It's like an actual waveform that's traveling through the air. We can't see it, but we can hear it. But we can also feel it. So if you have like a really low waveform, what it's doing is it's actually pushing the air on the speaker. If you stand in front of a speaker at a club, you can feel it pushing the air, and you can feel it on your chest, and we can feel it, those low frequencies. We can't really feel the high frequencies because they're kind of too fast to really feel. But with an LFO, because it's a physical waveform that actually is physical in the world, they realize that they can use these to control other parts of synthesizers. So the LFO can be used in a similar way to an envelope, but the difference is that an envelope, when you hit the note, it goes through the motions one time and then you release it and it stops. When you hit an LFO, what it does is it makes a cycle. It makes like a loop of a shape, and that can control different things over time. So we have a couple different parts here for an LFO: the frequency, the sync, and the retrigger. Frequency is the main one here. It's just how fast the LFO moves. The frequency is the same as the rate. So if I go over here to my LFO, and let's see here. Let's use the LFO to control my pitch here. And we'll set this to LFO 1. Now if let's just hold this note down. There we go. Okay, so if I play this, you can hear it's changing the pitch. I'm gonna go ahead and it's a little bit fast. Right? There we go. Hold on, let me just turn this release off. I don't want that release like that. Cool, and I'll turn this one off. There we go. So with this one here, let's set the sync to 1 second. Right, so I've got this here, I've got my rate is here, and we look at this. So it sounds like that mini Moog. Yep, well, I mean, it's basically what this is. It's kind of like a, they're all, I mean, the mini Moogs, you can do a lot of cool stuff with it, but it's basic. This is pretty basic as well. So this LFO here, what we're doing is we're using it to control the pitch over here. How much of the pitch is right here in this knob here, and then, so let's set this to 12. There we go. So that's 1 octave. Now, this one here is how fast it is. There's other stuff over here, but basically that's what we're dealing with here. And then we have different shapes here. So we can have it be a square. Which sounds like an alarm. Now the reason why alarms sound like this, or like ambulance sound like this, is because these LFO generating the pitch, this is actually a super simple way that it's been around for a very long time, as obviously not as digital, but as something that we can use to control stuff. It's been around for a very long time. I'm talking like the 50s, when they first started making synthesizers back in the 50s and 60s, and basically old sirens and alarms was just a oscillator that made the sound, and then an LFO to kind of make the sound change like pitch, and then you just turn it on and off, and that's it. That's like the basic way, and that's why this sounds like an alarm. Right, so right, and that's what that sounds like. And then if we wanted to, like a and if we wanted to make it sound more like, you could make even sound more like a, like this one here. This right now it's an octave, right? But make that a little bit faster. Let's change the amount here. Let's change this amount to be less than an octave. Something like that sounds more like an ambulance, like a French ambulance or something like that. So you can set up different things, and once you start to realize it's like, whoa, that you could do so much with this. But the other thing that's really cool about this is you can have all these things controlling other things. And that's where synthesizers start to get really interesting and more complex. So before we get into that though, let's just go back here and make sure we're cool with these LFO controls. You got the frequency is how fast the LFO moves. That's this one right over here. The rate is our frequency. Right. Then you've got the sync, which locks the LFO rate to the song tempo. So in this case here, the sync can be one of these here, which is like an 8th note or 16th note or whatever, or it can be in seconds, 0.1 second, 1/10 of a second, 1 second, or 10 seconds. And then this one, it's an interesting way to do it, but we've got that one here, the sync, what you're syncing it to, and then the rate within that. So in this case, we're syncing it to a second, which is not syncing it to the song. And then we're adjusting the rate right here. And then you've also got retrigger. This restarts the LFO every time you press a key. And in this case, the restart here can be set with the sync. It can be set with the gate, which means when I'm hitting the key. It can be set to a single, it just goes, or random, which is just going to restart it in a different place every time. So every synthesizer is slightly different, and you have to kind of go in and learn from the manual on every different synthesizer that you run across. This is something that you'll just have to do. There's no getting around it. So until you get to the point where you can really understand it without looking at the manual. Whoa, don't put your feet on that. So that's what's going on here with these different parts of the synth. I'm not sure why the dog woke up. You're supposed to still be asleep, puppy. All right, so the routing. So how do you connect the modulation sources with their destination? So our modulation sources are the LFO and the envelopes, and there's usually 2 LFOs and a couple of envelopes as well. Different synthesizers handle routing in different ways. Sometimes the source will have menus to select the destination, and sometimes the destination will have a modulation amount knob in it. So for example, this one here, let's say for example our pitch of the LFO is right here. You see how it says T, that stands for tune, mod 1 and 2. So we have 2 sources here, and I can click on it and I can pick different things to change the pitch. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. We don't need to get into a whole bunch of these things, and I don't even like stack voice. I don't even know how that would work. But the basic ones are down here at the bottom, the ADSR 1 and 2. These are our envelopes. And we have LFOs 1 and 2. Here. So you would choose one of these. In this case, I've chosen LFO 1 as my source. And then right here is my amount. If I double click it, it puts it back to 0. And I can click it down to make it go down or up to make it go up. And if you look at that number that's changing in the right-hand corner of my screen, you can see that's how much it would change. So if I wanted to change by an octave, I would set that to 12. And that's going to be an octave. If I want it to be 2 octaves, I think all the way up is probably 2 octaves. Yeah, 24. And again, I could go down by 12, or I could go down by 24 to change the octave down. And I double click it to put it back in the middle there. And if I can just turn it off, and then right there, it goes to off. So we can use that there, and that's kind of like showing us its little matrix right here in the destination. And then I could also go over here. Let me go ahead and turn that off. I don't want the LFO affecting my pitch here. And then what I could do is I can go over here to my filter, and I can say, okay, I want the LFO to affect my filter here. So, all right, so there's my sound. And let's get the LFO to adjust that. So right now you can see it's set for LFO 1. So if I turn this down, let's go back to this here. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. And I make adjustments to my frequency here and my modulation amount here. So when it's set to 0, nothing's going to happen. And when I set it up, I probably want to put this kind of right in the middle. And then when I adjust my rate, And you can hear we can start to get really weird and crazy sounds. And I haven't even really done anything that much to it yet. So that's one thing we can do. We can also use a LFO to kind of modulate itself. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have this one start off at, let's have this one start like this. Let's have it just do 20. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it kind of go over time. Low cut, low sounds like a boxer engine. Sounds pretty nice. Yeah, it's pretty good actually. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have this set. So it starts and goes like that. Like that. That's what we're going to have it do right here. Like that. So I'm going to start it right here at the rate. I'm going to have the rate the rate mod is going to be set by the envelope 2. What is this? This is my ADSR 2 for now. Let's change that. I'm going to put that back to 0. I'm going to set this to none. And I'm going to have the envelope 2 connect to this rate. I'm going to go down here to my source under the rate mod, have that be ADSR 2 and ADSR 2. Have my sustain all the way down. Have these guys up here a little bit like that. Pull that down all the way. And now let's have these be higher. Oh wait, I didn't set that to anything. Hold on, there we go. ADSR 2. Boom, there we go. Why is that not? Maybe the depth mod? No. ADSR 2. Well, that should be doing it, but it's not. It doesn't appear to be doing much of anything here. Maybe I just have to set it. Yeah, I just have to set it higher. There we go. Yeah, pretty cool. There we go. So now I can get that going. And we can mess with this here. And then change this here so we can have it doing. So if you just know a little bit about this stuff, and you kind of start to think about how it all works together, you can make some really, really cool sounds. And as you can see, I haven't really done that much. What I've got happening here is my LFO 1 is controlling the filter, and then my envelope 2 is controlling the rate of LFO 1. And that's how we have that set up there. So the main things you need to know is with each synthesizer, you have to understand how all this stuff kind of works together. So your source, your destination, all that stuff like that. Some synths have a modulation matrix, where they have like an overall matrix, and in there you have the mod source, and you have a mod destination and a mount. But these are your main parts here. The destination, the source would be your LFO or your envelope or something else. The destination is your pitch, filter frequency, amplifier, something like that. And the amount is how much the source affects the destination. So for example, we have, it says source is LFO, destination is oscillator 1 pitch, and the amount would be like this. And oftentimes the trickiest part of understanding the synth is learning how it does modulation. That oftentimes becomes the hardest part of working with the synthesizer. So if we just go in here and that's the Tyrell synth. Let's take a look at some other synthesizers in here. Let's go ahead and use, not Tyrell, let's use Massive. There we go. We'll use the regular Massive here. So this is Massive, and Massive, it looks like a lot at first, and they all kind of do look like a lot the very first time you check them out. But I'm going to go over here to File, I'm going to select New Sound. So there's this here. And I'm going to go ahead and choose my different waveform. Now, Massive is a wavetable synth. So I can go in here and I can choose my different wavetables. What this means, though, is each one, you can see here it says, it has like some things in here. So this one would be a square to saw 2. So if I go down here to square, and I go up, if I hit this, it's going to change the sound. Right, like that. So all these different ones have a different starting point for the sounds. Now with this one, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make it so my envelope here affects my wavetable position, because I want it to change the sound over time with the wavetable. So I'm going to go over here to my envelope number 1, and just as an aside here, just real quick, envelope number 4 controls your amplifier. So I'm going to go over here to envelope number 1, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it over here to my wavetable position. And I'm going to click on this and drag it up. See where I am here? So I just drag this over here, and I just click on this and I drag it up to it to show how much it's going to affect it. Right, so what I'm going to do, come down here, I'm going to set my level, my sustain level. And this is a little bit confusing here. This took me a while to figure this out with Massive. Your sustain level is actually the decay level. So put that down like that. Put my attack faster. Let's get the envelope here going the same. I want the envelope to basically be, I want it to like just, well, here, there we go. That's fine. So you can see, let's make this a little bit shorter. There we go. So what it's doing is it's controlling this right here by clicking by that amount. Now let's put a filter on this. So the filter is right here. I'm going to have it go into filter 1 completely. Let's bring the dog over here. So I'm going to have it go into filter 1 completely, which is this little fader right here. And I'm going to have my filters be serial, so they go one right into the other. Although it doesn't really matter. I'm going to turn off my filter number 2 here. And pull this down. Let's go to low pass filter like this, and I've got my cutoff and resonance here. Turn my resonance down. Come on, puppy. I don't know why she woke up. Maybe she has to use the bathroom. I'm going to go take her to the bathroom here in just a second. So let's make this similar. Let's take this one here. Let's put this here. Let me hit play. Let's set this down a little bit. So my real-time properties here, transpose that down. There we go. Let's make this sound longer, which is envelope number 4 here, which is just the default. So I'll set this up. There we go. We've got to go back into number 1 over here. Cool. Now let's go to the voicing. Set it to monophonic. There we go. Cool. Don't bite that. Let's turn on the Bronner tube. Give it a little bit of a bump. Cool. Let's have this envelope number 1 go over here to this one as well. There we go. pretty cool stuff. Now I can also take this envelope number 2 and put this one up here to give it a different sound. There we go. Pitch it up an octave. Bring it down and level here. So what we're doing here is this amplifier is an amplifier that's on each of my parts here. It's basically like a mixer. So if I pull this up all the way, it's louder, and if I turn it down, it's less loud. It's just a mixer. I'm just mixing it to taste. And there you go. For me, like when I'm thinking about this stuff, because I do a lot of cooking, and this, it's exactly like cooking. It's like you add a little bit of salt. Okay, it needs a little bit more salt, or it needs to be a little bit more water added in. It needs to be a little bit more of this, that, or whatever. Less of that, whatever. The problem is with cooking, of course, once you add too much, you can't. It's hard to, you can't unadd it like painting. Which with this, at least you can like kind of back it out if you need to. So this is the basics of synthesizers. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording there.